I am interviewing Ann Appert about her connection with the Lafayette Library. So, the first thing I wanted to ask you are, what are your first and best childhood memories of the library?
Of this library?
Or of libraries.
Libraries.
Sorry, just in general.
Okay. Can I cover some of these questions all in one answer?
Of course.
Okay. So I grew up in San Rafael, and we had a Carnegie library. And so it was a beautiful two-story brick building with a big fireplace upstairs in the adult section. And, it was a neighborhood, or, a town of little ranch houses. And I didn't know anybody with a two-story house. So that library was like a grand home away from home, like having a friend with a country house or something, where you could go and sit in front of that fireplace and, read or whatever. It was a great escape through junior high and high school. I remember going often. So
how important was reading to you growing up, and what are some of your favorite childhood books?
Well, reading was very important to me growing up. I was a very avid reader. At one point, over several years, I would go every Saturday, check out 6 books, take them back the next Saturday, sort of in the young adult fiction years, if you will. Just kept rotating 6 books a week I would read, all the way through. My favorite, I have sort of 2 favorites, and sort of the highbrow and a little bit lower brow. My favorite, a favorite throughout, definitely was Little Women. Very inspiring book, as well as a fun read, a great story, because then I wanted to be Jo and write books. I mean, I think every reader at one point thinks they want to write books. And then my second favorite is the Betsy Tacy Tibbs series by Maud Hart Lovelace, which is a great series about some real-life girls who grew up at the turn of the century in Milwaukee or outside of Milwaukee. Well, they say Milwaukee in the book. In fact, it's outside Minneapolis, because actually last summer my daughter and I went and toured the museum to this book series, because I got her interested in it as well, and we both loved the Betsy Tacy Tibbs books.
What awareness of community did you have while you were growing up?
Well, San Rafael was a community a lot like Lafayette. Where
Are we talking about San Rafael, Marin?
In Marin.
That's where I taught at Marin Academy.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I lived there.
So, it was a similar type of community. You had neighborhood pools where everybody went, and, you did a lot of your socializing through the activities of kids. My parents were both extremely involved in the community through church and through Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. So, I feel like I always lived in a community that had a strong sense of community and was very interwoven, where people gave back to the town and helped the other, residents, neighbors, whatever, with whatever needed to be doing.
Okay. And what is your educational background and your work experience, all of that?
Okay. Well, when I left high school, I finished high school at San Rafael High in Marin, and I went back east to Cornell, and I studied social planning and public policy. When I was working in Marin as a high school student, my job was to recruit volunteers from the high school to place in different nonprofits throughout Marin. They had a representative at every high school who had that job. And so I, was very interested in that kind of community work or whatever, and was, sort of had in mind that I was going to run the Red Cross. And then I came to graduate from college, and, you have to support yourself, and I don't know, I just ended up working on Wall Street in New York City. So I couldn't have been any further from. Actually, I did an internship while I was at Cornell in the South Bronx, and it was very frustrating to work in the nonprofit sector that was so resource poor. You couldn't accomplish anything because you had nothing to work with, is what it felt like. And so I was a little discouraged by that and decided to pursue corporate life and see what that was like. So, and as you know, you kind of get in there, you get your golden handcuffs on and get going. And I ended up staying there until my children were, my twins were 1 year old. I went back for 1 year after they were born. And then from then on, after my kids were born, I spent a couple more years in New York. We moved to Lafayette, and all of my work since then has been professional volunteer work, if you will, just, you know, president of PTAs and involved with school board and that kind of thing. A couple of nonprofits now.
So what attracted you to Lafayette, and how long have you lived here?
We've lived here 15 years, and we chose Lafayette for two reasons. One, by the time we moved back to California, my parents had moved to Lafayette because my dad was working in Alameda now instead of San Francisco. And number two, my husband works New York hours, and he wanted to be able to take public transportation to work at 4 in the morning. So BART was a big advantage, which you can't do from Marin. There's no public transportation in those hours.
Well, if we define the goals of community as a place of mutual support, shared values, and acceptance of differences, how do you see Lafayette meeting these goals?
Well, I found Lafayette and the people I've met here to be very mutually supportive. We definitely share a set of values that very family oriented and you know, interest in, I think I've mostly met people here who have an interest in the greater good as opposed to just being interested in their own advancement. I think some other communities are a little bit more materialistically oriented, et cetera. I think people here are a little bit more community minded and interested in the greater good.
Okay. And what are your earliest memories of the Lafayette Library?
Well, you know, as a mom with young children, of course, you love libraries, and I actually had been in a part of New York City that had a new library and was beautiful, and you could take your kids and they could crawl all around on the floor and whatever when they were growing up. And then we came to Lafayette. You know, that my first times at the Lafayette Library weren't very positive experiences with little kids necessarily. The children's section is not separate enough to be comfortable, as they're a little bit noisier than the general population. It's an old, you know, even 15 years ago, it was an older, rattier feeling place. But, you know, kids love fresh material, and we still went with regularity and checked out tons. We didn't really hang out there the way I would have in a different type of library, but we definitely went and checked out tons of picture books on a regular rotating basis through the kids being young, because they like to have fresh stuff coming in.
Sure, sure. And how do you think the library serves a community?
Well, I think the library is one of the greatest roles it plays in serving the community is providing that second home for residents, you know, a different place to be that is pleasant to be in, and where you can do and see interesting things, read about interesting things, meet up with neighbors, that kind of thing. I see it as having a role as a hub for the community.
Okay. And have you been involved in the library over the years? I think you talked about that, and if so, in what way? We're talking about the children, your children. Do you use the library yourself as an adult at all or anything?
Well, not
Not that much.
not that much. I tend to like to own books.
Okay.
So I tend to buy. Occasionally I'll take my computer to the library, but honestly I go to Orinda more. I prefer to be in a bright environment, not so dark and feeling, I don't know, our
So
library
you're
doesn't
looking
feel
forward
good.
to the new one.
So I'm very much looking forward to the new one.
Okay. And what other community events, projects, organizations have you been involved with? And if you can tell me about some of your personal experiences, any kind of anecdotal material or anything is really really welcome here.
Okay. But not talk about how I was involved with working on this library?
Well, but that's coming up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's coming up here. Yeah, that'll be coming up.
Okay.
And why is the new library important to you at San Rafael?
Well, how about the role that I played in getting the new library built?
Sure,
Is,
I'm just going
is
to go
that
down
here?
all of these questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because I see them as all sort of interactive. I got very involved from the beginning in school issues and helping to run the schools.
Yeah, that's a
And,
segue.
and then, you know, you kind of get a reputation for being somebody who likes to work on these kinds of things. So when Lafayette Community Foundation was formed, a friend from my book group was involved from the beginning, Gwen Lennox, and she asked if I would come and be a member of the board. And my role in being a member of the Community Foundation board was to start serving on the committee to fund the new library. So that was from very early on. And I, you know, I've always been involved, I've maintained obviously my involvement in school issues because I've been on school board now for 6 years for the elementary school district. And, you know, involved in a lot of organizations that serve youth, like I'm Girl Scout leader and involved in the association that runs Girl Scouts in Lafayette and helping with that. You know, I have skills in administrative areas and I like to apply them to helping the community run because basically good communities run on volunteer efforts. And so, you know, the fun in Lafayette is that everything overlaps. So, you know, it was my friend from book group who I actually met in Newcomers who got me involved in the Community Foundation, but then the schools have a big role in partnering with the new library, and that was a natural overlap because I was on the whole library effort years before that was a partnership that had to be made in order to get the state grant. And you know, there's just a lot of interaction and overlap, and you know, it's sort of fun to be involved with all of it because you get to know people all over town, not just your immediate neighbors, and people of all ages. That's been a real advantage of being involved in some of the community work beyond schools, especially the library, because you know, you can get yourself stuck in a little bubble where you just are meeting people who have very similar age children and are going through the same thing at the same time. And definitely the participating on the committee, the cabinet, the library cabinet, introduced me to a lot of people with a lot of different, in a lot of different stages of life, all of whom had this similar commitment to seeing the library built, but also had a wide variety of skills to bring to the project. And it's, there's a lot of talent in Lafayette, and it's really fun to see it emerge and be applied to community issues.
Okay, and were you involved in this 1996 study and on the task force or any of this information, or does this apply to you, or shall we skip down to why is the new library important to you?
I was not involved in the 1996 study. I came in a little bit later, but I was very, very involved in the development of the library being a learning center and the consortium and all of that. Absolutely hands in from day one. And you know, I think an important piece of history note here, in order to receive the library grant from the state, you had to partner with schools. And a fellow school board member at the time was Roger Falcone, who was a professor at Berkeley, and he had some role in Lawrence Hall of Science, I'm not sure what, but he had just hired the new director, I think, been on that committee. And his idea in trying to develop this application for the grant was to bolster our part of partnering with the schools to have maybe broader education programs brought in from Lawrence Hall of Science, because he had that connection. But the idea really took off when Bob Fisher was with us sitting in a meeting, and he had the idea, well, if Lawrence Hall of Science, why not, you know, all these other members of the consortium? And to be honest, you know, I was on the ground floor trying to raise the money for the library, and we must have spent 2 years in meeting monthly or every 2 weeks, talking about who might give and how we might approach them before we ever approached anyone. I mean, we spent a long time trying to figure out what the heck we were doing. We didn't know. And one of the hardest parts about it was that we didn't really have a good story to tell. We didn't have something to sell, if you would. Yeah, and the whole Learning Center and Consortium was created as much because we were trying to create a marketing campaign, you know, something to tell people about why they would want to do this and to differentiate it from just building a new building. So the consortium members were really recruited by Bob Fisher. He had those connections with all sorts of organizations and helped to bring them into this, to the consortium. And we worked, as he was rounding up members, we were working with Brian O'Neill, who is a neighbor who had owned a huge ad agency in San Francisco, and his expertise is the creative genius side of advertising, and he was helping us brand it, and you know, coming up with the whole Glenn Seaborg Learning Consortium concept, and helped at the time to make a video of what it is we were selling to help bring the story to potential donors.
Okay, so what do you think created the change from the limited number of people named as contributors to the larger group that came forward? And I think you've partially answered that, but is there anything you'd like to add to that? I mean, you created a narrative and made it more unique, as you pointed to.
To some degree, too, you had to have some momentum develop before the other people came in. And so part of it was the story to get those initial people in, but a big debt of gratitude is owed to the people who believed in this long before. I mean, when we were getting our first money donated, we didn't have a building design yet. We didn't have some of this narrative. It was evolving as we were doing it. You know, it wasn't like everything was clean and neat and packaged and you had this lovely marketing campaign with those first people who we were trying to get.
So it was very organic.
Just very organic, and just
grew out of each
discussing who knows who and can approach them and might be willing, and very much who's community minded and might be willing to step up, you know, as you're doing, who have the resources. So I think, because at the time that the initial donations were made, there was a real risk that possibly it wasn't going to get built at the grandeur that we were hoping. You know, it was a very expensive project. We hadn't obviously gotten the state grant yet. We were still actually having meetings about what should be included in the library in terms of the community hall, you know, all that kind of design elements that you might use to sell somebody. That wasn't all done. So anyway, those people who came in at first, you know, the whole community, like I say, owes a debt of gratitude for their willingness to take the risk of donating to something that was might be a little bit shaky, and long before, I mean, there definitely were a lot of skeptics at the time. People with resources who could have participated, who said libraries are a thing of the past, you know, or it's way too big a project, there's not that kind of money in Lafayette, you'll never get, you know, at the time our goal was 11 million to raise, that you'll never get it, and so they weren't going to give their 50,000 because they just didn't have faith that any of it was going to come to fruition. A lot of skeptics. And then I think the turn came, well, a big turn came at the point of, as the project developed more reality, you know, the meetings with the architects, the building design coming forth, the application to the state that sort of defined and fleshed out some of this learning center stuff so that we could have something to market.
Yep.
Yeah, all those things, it wasn't as big a risk. It was, you were donating to something real. And, you know, we very heavily used peer pressure in our efforts of at one point, we were going to put out sort of the first public thing to everybody about who had donated so far, that would include who had donated so far, even though the broad community had not been asked to donate at all. And it was all about trying to get certain people who are considered leaders in their subsections of the community to participate so that others would see their name on the list and step up as well. And that was, that's when the ball really gained
became more real.
Gained some real momentum.
Probable,
and there were many more people committed to it, and eventually I think it became something you didn't want to be left out of.
Great. So why is this library so important to you? Just personally, why?
Well, I like to, first off, like I say, I'd love to have a second place to go. I like to take my laptop. Lots of people use Oakwood as that now. You see those tables in the Great Hall filled with people at their computers. And so obviously the need is there in Lafayette because I'm thinking that's our population who's sitting there. So what it means to me, though, is I like to be a part of a community with a rich community life, with opportunities for programs and learning and, frankly, pretty buildings in downtown. I want to live somewhere that has vibrancy. And this library, I think, is going to continue to to increase the vibrancy of our whole town, our downtown, our community.
Seems like more involvement from different
from
sectors
everyone.
Of the community, too. It's coming together that they might not have known about each other in the past, etc.
Right.
Yeah.
And
the age groups.
And the different age groups, and it's got a lot of potential.
So I think you answered how you first got involved, and do you want to say a little bit more specifically the role that you played?
Well, I was, the role I played in, sorry, do you want me to close the door? Okay. So anyway, the role that I played was, I view this as really, not to take away anything from the people who, like Gwen, who eventually was our campaign director in a paid capacity, but before was a million-hour volunteer like the rest of us on the cabinet. It was very much a project that was led by a small group of people who worked together. And that is the campaign cabinet, because while you can call it the campaign cabinet and all about the campaign to raise the money, the fact is the campaign cabinet is the ones who created the Learning Center concept and the consortium and all the rest in order to have something to raise money around. So really the entire, well, not the entire, I mean, there are subcommittees like the art committee, things like that, but the campaign cabinet became a steering committee for the library. And it involved, Steve Falk and Ann Meredith were at every meeting, and it was a very small core group who was charged with actually going out and raising the money, but was really, like I say, steering the whole project. I mean, right down to picking the granite one day because we were meeting and the granite came in with the wrong big pink splotches on it and we needed a new granite. So, very involved. And my particular role on the cabinet was, chair of major donors or whatever, to some degree. It wasn't very formal. Kathy Merchant and I, at one point we considered we were sort of we had our donors divided in some way that I can't even remember, but essentially we were both chairing major donors. I had major and she had, I don't remember our nomenclature, but eventually we were just basically the big fundraisers. That was the role.
Okay. And what did you enjoy most throughout your participation?
Oh, without question, working with the other people on the cabinet and getting to know the people. Fabulous people. I didn't know, and like I say, working across age groups. I had never met Kathy Merchant before. Various people I knew, Ann Groden, very peripherally. Definitely getting to know people and see the talent come out. Linda Peterson, some people who've become very close friends. I've met through there. So that's really what I enjoyed the most. And it was very fun to create something that I think is going to be successful, but even more than that, had its elements of success. Like the day we were up in Sacramento and the library grants were awarded. I mean, I've never been at anything where it's so exciting in my life than the moment they announced that we won that, the elation in our group. And it was very fun to be part of those successes.
Great. So what were some of the obstacles you encountered and how did you overcome them?
Wow, the obstacles were mammoth as well. The biggest obstacle is that we needed to raise $12 million, 11, 12, wherever we ended up. You know, I think we hit something a little over 13 in the end. We needed to raise that money, and no one wanted to do it.
And you also
The biggest,
seem to me to convince people this is a viable project.
well, you had to convince them of that, but you also, I mean, we're talking about volunteers, and we're talking about a group of, there were really 4 people out asking for money. That's it. There were other people who would occasionally, and we tried to recruit, and we'd have these training sessions, and they might share the information with 1 or 2 friends, but nobody stuck to the effort. Nobody wants to ask other people for money. That was the biggest obstacle. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't want to ask other people for money. But at one point, it just became clear that the only way to not have it all hanging over our head anymore was going to be to just do it. I mean, like, it just, as unpleasant as I found it too, it's really awful calling up people then you have to see on the soccer field next week. And, you know, it's easy if you know them to be like-valued and like-minded, but there's a lot of people you just don't know all that well, and you don't know what their attitude is going to be. And I'll be honest, there's a couple of people along the way who weren't always polite about the whole thing. And, you know, so the obstacle was that no one wanted to do the work, and really that, you know, a big part of that 13 million, certainly not all of it, a lot of it came in through community contributions and whatever when we went out to broader appeals, but a big part of that came in because 4 people were asking, that's it. And I was just going to say, you know, it's also hard to do this in your community because, you know, you can, because of people, how people respond to the approach to help the community, and some people's very negative responses, then you lose respect for them, but you still have to interact with them in the community. So that was a part that I didn't really like. You know, it's almost be easier to have done this kind of work outside your own community, people you're, you know, not going to see again if they happen to not be nice about it.
Yes. So who have you observed making a real impact on the library? Are there any particular personalities that stood out and why?
Well, I mean, you can't look at this project without looking at the core of the cabinet, which was Gwen Lennox, Lois Lane, Ann Groden, Teresa Geringer, me, and then Kathy Merchant came on board. That was the core, and then Steve and Ann Meredith. That was the core of the cabinet. And Linda Peterson, also, I forgot her. She was very much involved as running the communications part of it. And, you know, we pulled in expertise at times. We worked with the schools. We brought people in. And Bob Fisher, who was our campaign advisor for a long time, obviously played a critical role in coming up with the consortium idea and driving that part of things. We would pull in personalities. There were lots of people who worked on this project in various ways. But that group, I mean, we're talking like, I don't know, 7, 8 years of meeting. At the height of it, we probably spent 3 years. It was like a part-time job. It was 20 hours a week plus for a lot of us who were doing the active asking. And a lot of meetings and a lot of, so that core cabinet group, you know, was critical. And if I left anybody out, I'm sorry, but those are the ones that stick
Sure.
in my mind as being central to the whole thing. And then And, you know, like I say, Brian O'Neill played a big role at one point, and then Bob Fisher, somebody who was involved and came and went. After a big commitment, I mean, when you're talking about 7 or 8 years, somebody could have worked on this for 3 years and then had to move on. They still made a substantial contribution. So, anyway.
Okay, so we talked about the obstacles.
Yeah.
What were some of the most rewarding things, and what was the most fun? And the more specific you can get, the better.
Oh, well, I mean, like I say, the day we got the library grant, the state library grant, that was it was so exciting. You know, I remember, I think Erling Horn was on the council at the time, and he was with us. I think he started to cry. We were so excited because we knew at that point, frankly, that this project that we had been selling, if we didn't get that grant, we weren't building the library had been talking about. We were going to have to scale it back massively. And that would have been a disappointment for everybody. You know, when you put all that into it and you have your ideal designed, you don't want to be, you know, shrinking it, scaling it back. This is what the community in all those meetings told you know, the architects and the city that they wanted in a facility. So winning that grant and the minute-to-minute debate about how the money, you know, they were down to the last bunch of money than they had, and somebody on the board, I got to tell you, the people sitting up there who were voting on this, half of them were on their BlackBerries the whole time. I don't think they were listening to a thing. And so you really were feeling like you weren't in too capable hands as these major decisions were being made. But somebody said, well, we should fund one in Contra Costa County. And then they said, well, what do we have? We have Walnut Creek, we have Lafayette, and we have Antioch. And at that time, it was a case, they were down to the last amounts of money that they had on hand. And Walnut Creek all the applications were either going to be funded at 100% or not funded. They did not have an option of being able to give partial grants. So Walnut Creek's grant was larger than the amount of money left. And so then it was kind of, then Antioch was being talked about, and it was, you know, obviously in government work, there's a lot more sympathy for a community like Antioch than there is for a community like Lafayette. You know, there are fewer people, or, I mean, not fewer, more people, and less private resources available, all that kind of stuff. Very much headed that way. I can't tell you how close the vote was. And Lafayette hadn't even been mentioned, I think, at this point. And then, you know, the people who touched on this project that you just would never know. Richard Whitmore is a school board member in the high school district, and he had been the assistant, he had been second in charge as state superintendent of education up in Sacramento, had been his job at one point. He happens to live in Lafayette. He knew a lot of people in Sacramento. And he got to this one assembly person who was sitting on the committee and was able to explain our idea about the consortium. We had a new superintendent in Lafayette at the time, Linda Wiesner, who happened to know this woman personally from the years she spent living in her district. And so Linda called her, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Lois, I don't even remember her last name, says, well, now the Lafayette Library has a very interesting approach. Maybe we should consider them. And then we just all were on pins and needles waiting to see how it came out. And I came home, and we were so, anyway, great elation, big party back here in Lafayette that night. It was really validation of a lot of, frankly, you know, kind of unpleasant work, struggles, et cetera, to getting to that point. And the one thing I felt terrible about is that my cleaning lady is somebody with similar age children who lives in Antioch, and I was feeling so bad coming home because, you know, I knew it was she was here that day, I was coming back to her, and I knew it was going to be in the newspaper the next day, or she was coming maybe the next day, and it was going to be in the newspaper that Lafayette had beat out Antioch, and I was feeling really bad, like, you know, and the thing, sometimes maybe, I don't want to say she's totally representative by any means, but when she brought it up before I did, and she said, well, that's a good thing you got it, because, we don't need a library. Nobody out here is interested in going to a library, or something like that. Just totally did not value the notion of a new library at all. And I felt, that was an interesting perspective, that there's places where libraries just aren't, or people who don't value libraries. And she's a great person, and she's got great kids, but I didn't have to feel as guilty, because we really felt guilty. So anyway, that was one very big highlight. And then, the first $1 million coming in, we got 3 $1 million gifts in really short order. And after years of really just spinning our wheels, thinking it was going to, I personally, at the point where the first one came in, was at a particular meeting. They saved it to tell us about it. Bob Fisher was our campaign advisor then, and he knew what it was going to mean in terms of boosting morale, that this had finally come through, because we had spun our wheels a lot and not really had any faith that we could get anywhere close to $12 million when we were looking around the table at each other, because of how it was going, and because we had had a professional assessment of whether we could raise the money, who also said no. It just was looking grim. And this first $1 million came in. That was fabulous. And then about a month later, I actually asked a family that had been one of the first families I met when I moved to Lafayette. I'd known forever. I had the privilege of being able to talk to them about the library, knew that we were very community-minded, and they gave $1 million. And those are exciting moments. When you get those yeses, it's very exciting. And it's very exciting to call the other people and share that news. Those things are really fun. I'll never forget Gwen. She is a phenomenal organizer and done tons of organizing of our campaign over this time. And we were probably, let's say we had $5 million in the bank by then. We were well into the fundraising. And she went on her first sort of very personal ask, like somebody she knew was a friend, they were going to have dinner, that she was looking for a big amount from, like $100,000, which is, big ticket. And she was like, she's such a steady, she's always optimistic, but she's, a very practical engineering type. She is an engineer, it's very steady as you go kind of thing. And she was like a child who had gotten the red bicycle for Christmas, and calling immediately after, having to share the news that these people had said yes, and how exciting it was to have somebody say yes to you, and all of that. Those moments were really very uplifting when people say yes.
Great. And so what values did this contribution touch that you hold dear? What are the values of the contributions? You got involved in this, you're working hard, you're having to talk to people that you have to see the next day who aren't polite. So what's keeping you going? What are the values behind what you're doing that you are motivating you and that you can define?
One of them, there's a personal value involved where I like to finish what I start. So,
Completion.
Even when it was difficult, even when, this is going on through the years when my kids were in very active years, maybe it was 5th grade through senior year of high school or something like that, the years when you want to be at all their events and all that, I had to give up a lot. All that asking of money in those central years when we were asking, those were all evening meetings when people were home, going out to people's houses and chatting. It was being out a lot. But I like to finish what I started. I would have had it finish a lot sooner than fall of 2009. It would have been nice. At one point we thought it would be built in time for my kids to have 1 year at it, yada, yada. And obviously they're not going to get, they've gone to college now and not going to get to use it at all. But so there's one value. But the other values, I really believe you have to it's cliche, but be the change you want to see in the world or something like that. You have to, if you want things to be different, you have to put in. And the other thing that, I don't know if it's so much a value, but a perpetual reflection that I go back to all the time about this is that Margaret Mead quote about never doubt that a small group of people can instigate massive change. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has, because this was such an organic effort coming from a small group of people. You know, I haven't discussed Anne Groden and her commitment, but I mean, basically, this one person in our community decided this needed to be done, and she was optimistic in face of tremendous obstacles, opposition, naysayers. I mean, the naysayers were huge, especially, you know, if we go all the way back to when she started her effort, which was, you know, I don't know if it's the 1996 study or even before that, right when she went off council to get this to happen. I mean, to see the end product, if you had been back then and sat in a room with all the people thinking about it and been able to foresee this end product, they would have all said, no way, that's a pipe dream, you know. So anyway, that's, there's power in optimism, and there's power in commitment, and tremendous power in shared values of wanting to provide learning opportunities for other kids. I mean, one of my stories, you had asked about the library, childhood memories of the library. And it actually came into focus for me when a friend teaches third grade at Happy Valley, and her class was reading a book about mansions, and she had somebody in her class who lives in, you know, there's not much low-income housing in Lafayette, but there's some. And she lived in a very little apartment, and this little girl was saying, oh, I wish I lived in a mansion. And another boy next to her, as only children can do, says, oh, I already live in a mansion. Because some houses in Lafayette are like mansions. But you know, growing up, my library was my mansion. It's the great equalizer. She can go to that library and have it be her home away from home. And I am motivated by wanting to provide that kind of opportunity for kids who don't have that opportunity. And like I said, I'm not sure how many of them are here in Lafayette, but there are some.
There's quite a few from what I've heard.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
There we go.
Okay, so what transformations have you seen in Lafayette regarding the new library?
Well, certainly there's a transformation in that,
and you can answer these with,
you know, I think there was an imbalance of naysayers. There used to be a disproportionate number of naysayers to optimists or supporters, and that balance has completely changed. Now everybody thought this was their original idea. I don't mean that, but you know, sometimes that happens in a community. You know, it certainly has given people a community project to organize themselves around. I've definitely seen I don't know if increase is the right word because it's been going on so long, but it's a rare project. There's not often something that draws in everybody's interest. And there's lots of people that support sub-interests within the community, you know, high school sports, the kids programs, whatever, your elementary school. But this is something that transcends all ages, all, you know, I've worked with people on this project from Marshall Duncan, who's in his 80s, I'm sure, to moms who worked on our projects recently who have kids who are itty bitty right now, so they must be maybe 30. I don't know how old they are, hard to judge, but there's definitely people from all age, people across all sorts of life phases who are involved in this and have an interest in this and are committed to this. And I think when it opens, it's going to be a tremendous community celebration. and a rare one, because you can't do this
Okay.
over and over.
So about the specific library, what's most exciting to you about the new library? And did any ideas, words, activities particularly draw your attention to some of the things? You know, we've seen like the
Yeah.
computer and
Well,
all this art and all this
you
kind
know,
of things for the children, etc.
I love that the new library is going to have a big separate children's area so that they can feel comfortable being noisy. It's too late for my kids. Maybe my grandkids can use it, but you know, that's a feature that's exciting. But there's, you know, I love the outdoor decks that are a feature of the library. That's you know, where I plan to spend some of my time when I'm hanging out there. I think this solar fireplace is going to be really unique and an interesting piece of community art that we can all experience and get behind. It be a nice cozy place to sit. You know, I look forward to those living room kind of spaces. And I think that the homework center and the teen room and all that, it's just really nice that all the different functions that you might want to have will have their own space so that they can happen simultaneously. So those are some things. And then I certainly love the idea about the different programs. I look forward to all the classes, presentations. I know that not all of them are going to be able to be free, but sometimes having the convenience of having it nearby is sort of gift enough, even if you have to pay to attend. I'm just glad that those resources are going to be brought right into our community.
Yeah. Why do you think that once, you know, it got going, that the citizens of Lafayette have responded so enthusiastically to the project? I mean, people are really excited about this.
They are. I think for the same reason. The people are excited for having that community hub. That's what I think that's what draws much of the interest, is having that community hub and having it's uplifting to be around things that are pretty and to have a little sense of pride in your community because your community looks good and it's a get back to the vibrancy. I think they're excited because there's going to be a new center of vibrancy in our community.
Stimulation.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of stimulation there.
Absolutely.
And opportunity.
Yeah.
What do you think you'll enjoy most in using it, you personally? Oh,
I look forward to going, and I'm a total magazine fiend. I love, I consume media, magazines and newspaper. I take 3 newspapers a day. I just love perusing, being informed. So I can see, I'm hoping to go there, take one of those big comfy chairs by the solar fireplace in the winter, outside in the summer, and you know, being able to read about all these things that interest me. Or, and then a good novel's also something to look forward to. But actually, to tell you the truth, I like to own books, but you can't subscribe to every magazine on earth. You know, so having that resource to broaden your horizons, even having that. I love books on tape in my car, having those to check out. You know, I'm looking forward to the larger collections that are going to be able to be housed in this library, because sometimes I find the pickings at our current library kind of slim. And so just having more to choose from and whatnot, I'm really looking forward to.
Okay, and the next question I think is kind of interesting about the internet. It says that some people predicted the internet would kill the printed word and libraries would become obsolete, as you alluded to earlier. So how do you think our new library can avoid such a fate?
Well, I think that the internet is definitely an integral part of any library at this point. You know, it's a place where people can go to access the internet and all that it has to offer. But, you know, it's not much fun to read extensively on a computer screen, at least as they're designed right now. And yeah.
You can't move it around and curl up with a book and
Exactly.
and internet and a chair.
No.
Yeah, with a
Well,
computer.
I don't know about that. You should see how my teenagers sit with their laptops all curled up in chairs, like practically pretzel-like, and still manage. But there isn't that same browsability as there is with physical materials. That
You don't have to plug the book in.
yeah.
Each
But
other.
but I think the other thing that makes the library even more critical rather than being killed by the internet is with the internet, people are more and more isolated. You know, you don't ever phone anyone anymore. You're always emailing. And the upside is you hear from more people because it's an easier form of communication, but you're missing talking to people, and many more people are able to work from home. But you know, at some point, there's a reason that our places like Starbucks and Barnes and Noble have crowds of people hanging around them. People want to be out with other people, even when they're doing some of this solitary work. It's why Oakwood's full. So our library will not, or any library, you know, will not become obsolete because people have that need to have a gathering place, and it will be that. I think.
That answers partly this next one about how the library will affect or serve or enhance a sense of community.
Yeah.
Take people out of the isolation of the being alone.
It'll take people out of the isolation, and actually through the whole consortium, it's not just the people who attend the library events. The actual running of this new library, the board that we've created, the the committees of the board, like the one you're on, the program committee, there are opportunities for people to engage and participate and give back, opportunities that exist in spades in the schools, but you know, your kids grow up, you're no longer in the schools. You know, this is one of the few community-wide opportunities. There's a few others like Town Hall Theater. If you have that interest in theater, you can, if you're more willing to be more officiously affiliated, you can be on some of the commissions. But this is just somewhere that you can actually engage with doing something to enhance your community. And it will take a lot of people to run this thing, a lot of volunteers. And you know, even if your job is just to come help set up chairs, you still get to know the other people. You know, have a way to give back.
Great. I think the next question about contact for interview, I think Brenda's really done well.
Yeah.
Other people you've mentioned
Yeah.
are involved.
Okay.
Okay. Unless there is somebody that you can think of that I should put down here.
Well, the only one, okay, I was thinking of, in sort of segment, Brian O'Neill is somebody who might be interesting to interview regarding his role around helping create and brand the consortium. And then, you know, the whole library, focusing on the library grant part, a little bit about that a little more detail on the politics. Richard Whitmore might be an interesting candidate to talk to about sort of the some of these more micro points in the process as opposed to the broad stroke.
Have I left anything out? Is there anything else you want to say? I mean, you've just...
No.
Okay.
I guess not. I think I'm good.
Okay.